Hey everybody, Matt Johnston here. We're back and we're talking about some efforts by the U.S. Department of Labor to supplement its workforce of investigators for the protection of workers. So before we get started on this particular topic, please do me a favor and click that subscribe button that you see down below. If you click on the bell, you'll also get a notice when we post new content. So at the beginning of February 2022, the U.S. Department of Labor announced that it was going to hire 100 additional investigators to support its compliance efforts in a number of particular areas. The press release states that it would be in support of enforcement efforts, including the protection of workers' wages, migrant and seasonal workers' rights to Family Medical Leave Act, and prevailing wage requirements for workers on federal contractors. So what is that? It's a mouthful. The U.S. Department of Labor oversees a number of enforcement categories, and in this case, they are going to be looking at a number of different programs. One of the things that the Biden administration has frequently discussed is its belief that contract workers or independent contractors are not really independent contractors. And so this is one of the ways in which the Biden administration is going to be going after independent contractor statuses amongst workers and their employers. So there's two parts to this thing that I think most small business employers need to take a look at. One is worker classification as an employee or an independent contractor. There are mechanisms in place in which an employer can hire an independent contractor legitimately and do work for the business that is an independent contractor rather than an employee. Of course, this saves on things like employer side withholding taxes, payroll taxes, as well as minimum wage requirements or working conditions, because an independent contractor is just that, they're independent. But if they're an employee, then the employer is obligated to provide, among other things, workers' compensation insurance, the payment of obviously payroll taxes, withholding taxes, and also things like unemployment premiums that are paid to the state, as well as a few other obligations that employers have, such as sick and safe leave or other kinds of worker protections. So making sure that you're classifying your employees properly as either employees or as independent contractors is an important factor, and it's one of these things that these investigators that are being hired will be looking at. The other misclassification that I often talk about is the misclassification between salaried and hourly workers, or people who are exempt versus non-exempt employees. One of the things that many small businesses do in order to sort of manage their payroll, their expenses, is they like to pay people on a salary. And just because you pay somebody on a salary does not mean they are not eligible for overtime protections. So for example, your administrative assistant that you may have, you can pay them a fixed amount of money per week. That's perfectly fine, but their job duties don't qualify them as exempt from overtime rules. So your administrative assistant that you pay, say $30,000 a year to, is going to still be eligible for overtime if they work more than 40 hours in a week. So the classification of employees as exempt versus non-exempt is directed by law and by regulation, and it involves both a fixed salary and job duties that allow them to be considered exempt. So this is the time in which I strongly encourage employers to really start looking at their job descriptions for their employees and determining whether or not that person is exempt or non-exempt based upon what this employee does for a majority of their work day or work week. So you may have workers who do things that are non-exempt work, but the majority of their time may very well be exempt, and you need to make sure that you have properly classified these employees. The other thing that I encourage people to make sure you understand is just because you have a temporary employee, just because you have seasonal employees, does not mean that they are not subject to minimum wage and overtime protections. So be sure you understand what you are getting into when it comes to wage and hour laws. I do believe that these investigators will be hired promptly and they'll get to work fairly promptly, and there will be some enforcement actions that are going to be coming up at some point soon. One of the things that the press release wanted to point out is that the wage and hour division, which oversees most of these wage and hour laws that we've talked about, exempt versus non-exempt, things like that, collected over $230 million in wages for fiscal year 2021. But never fear, at least the government is going to be able to tell you, hey, by the way, there are education initiatives that are out there. So remember, these investigators are there to ensure compliance with the law. The best way to stay off the wage and hour division's radar is to be complying with the wage and hour laws. Fairly simple, right? If you have questions, please give us a call. In the meantime, we will talk to everybody later and go out and watch some live soccer. Bye-bye.